Why I will never, ever invest for cash flow ever again. Boy, do I have a horror story for you guys. So I used to be all about cash flow. I would only invest based on cash flow. I would argue with any investor who said to invest based on anything other than appreciation. Other people would talk about appreciation. I'd fight with them on the internet. I'd tell them they were stupid. I would say, no, cash flow is king. Appreciation can change in a minute. Always invest for cash flow. Well, let me tell you why I was 100% wrong about that. So I invested in an apartment building. This is not an Airbnb. This is an apartment building for long term, but the same concept applies. So I bought in the Midwest, which is historically not an area where there's a lot of appreciation happening. I was planning to hold this property forever, so I didn't need it to appreciate. The cash flow looked great on it, and so I bought it. Really affordable, but again, we're not expecting any appreciation because we're expecting to hold it forever. 3 years down the road, it's going all right. And the big apartment building across the street, that owner has let his building fall into complete disrepair. So much so, it becomes an area with a lot of crime. And eventually it gets so bad that the city condemns the building. So we now have a condemned building with windows broken out, people squatting in it, there's drugs, there's crime, there's all kinds of things going on across the street in this building. Now, our tenants in our nice building are not comfortable living there anymore because the crime is migrating across the street. They're getting their cars broken into. We've made multiple, and when I say multiple, I mean hundreds of calls to the police. This is not something that's high priority for the police. And eventually we end up with a lot of vacancies. We can't keep good tenants in because of the crime from this property across the street. But again, low priority for the police. The owner, I don't know what in the world this owner is doing or where he is or what he's tried to sell the building a number of times, but it won't sell because who wants to buy that? And who wants to be across the street from that? We've been slowly rehabbing and redoing each unit in this building anytime somebody moves out so that we can raise the rent, make it a nicer building. And we've had to re-renovate a number of units because people are breaking in, squatting, and they are busting holes in the windows, they're busting holes in the drywall, they're just destroying these properties. So now not only are we losing money on the units not being rented, we're using money and having to go in and clean up after the people breaking in. And so finally, this has been going on for like 18 months. We can't really get anywhere. And so finally we say, you know what, screw it. We're just gonna sell this property. We wanted to keep it forever. We were trying to stick it out in hopes that someone would have come along and bought the building across the street and cleaned it up, but it just hasn't happened. And at this point, we've lost enough money on the rehabs and the vacancy that it's just time to sell it. Well, back to I never invested for appreciation. I only invested for cash flow. This building is not worth $1 more than I paid for it 3.5 years ago. And the problem now is when I go to sell it, which we are under contract now, I'm actually having to sell it for a little less than I paid for it because it's been torn up since I bought it. And by the time we pay our real estate agent and get through everything, we're selling for quite a loss. And had we invested in an area where even slight appreciation is common, we would have been in a better position had we had to sell this. So where I made my mistake is in thinking that nothing could happen that would make me want to sell this property. I planned on owning it forever, but I didn't take into consideration there could be outside circumstances that are outside of my control that make me have to sell this property for a loss. So now we're having to sell this property for a big loss. We're getting out from under it, but this is why I will never ever invest only for cash flow again, because when you invest in areas that the cash flow is really high, but the prices are low and there's not a lot of appreciation, typically that means that the real estate there is not desirable. So let's look at this for a minute. So when you're looking at cap rates in commercial properties, so these are apartment buildings, places where the prices are really low and the cap rates are really high, which means that the cash flow is higher, you're typically looking at areas that are not super desirable. So not areas that are growing, not areas where there's a lot of primary homeowners, moving in from other areas. So, the Midwest, Memphis, Indianapolis, these are all places where if you're looking only for cash flow, then you're in good shape. But the real estate in those areas is not as desirable, meaning there's just not a lot of demand in that market, so you don't see a lot of prices going up. So whereas we look at cap rate in multifamily commercial buildings, we look at cash on cash return in Airbnbs. So when you're looking for Airbnb markets, and across the board, you're seeing these really high cash on cash return numbers and low purchase prices, that means that real estate is probably not desirable. And I'm going to use an example here. If you want to buy a commercial apartment building in San Diego or Austin or Nashville, these are areas where the cap rates that are on the MLS are going to be lower. The purchase prices are going to be higher, which means cap rates are going to be lower for the income because there's a ton of demand in these markets. And there are people who will buy in these markets that need a lower return than you as a Main Street investor. These are markets where you're not going to see really high cap rates laying around on the MLS. Same thing with Airbnb properties. So in the big desirable areas where there's a ton of tourism, where everybody wants to own properties like beach markets or mountain markets, a lot of times you're going to see across the board lower cash on cash returns in those markets. But if you're looking for Airbnbs in Memphis, Tennessee, you're going to see higher cash on cash returns. You're going to see lower purchase prices, but you may get bad reviews because your guests don't feel safe, or your guests had to drive by some unsightly properties to get to your property, things like that. So when you invest in markets that are desirable, like in a beach market, if something happens outside your control, you have the ability to sell without losing as much money than if you invested in an area only for cash flow. So now you're probably like, well, Avery, if I can't invest for cash flow, then what do I do? Here's what I do. I choose very good markets where the real estate is desirable, where there's high demand from both tourists and potential buyers, because this guarantees me that I'll always have a large pool of tourists to draw from to rent my property. And if it's attractive real estate for people to buy, everybody wants to own beach houses, for example, then I insulate myself from having to ever sell for a loss. Now, you can't guarantee you'll never have to sell for a loss, but it does insulate you a little bit. So what I do and what my strategy is now, I only buy in really high demand markets, and I look for the worst property in the best location in these markets, because you can fix up a house or apartment building, you can add amenities, you can add pickleball courts, you can add pools, you can put in new kitchens, whatever a property needs, you can do all that, but you can never change the location of a property. So my advice to you guys, never invest for cash flow only. You're putting yourself at risk. And cash flow, while it can help you quit your corporate job and get into real estate investing full time, the real wealth is built in the appreciation. So the worst property in the best market, in the best location, you can make that property what you need it to be. You can get it to that cash on cash return number that you need. Then you have all this insulation around your investment of having high tourism traffic, having desirable real estate, so that your exit strategies are better than if you invested in a weird place only for cash flow. If you like this video, please give us a like and make sure you subscribe, because that's how we can keep making more videos for you. Hopefully you learned from my mistake. Hit that subscribe button below. Later, guys.